The world around us is hostile to the Word of God and to biblical values, but we are called to be salt and light, to stand for truth in a decaying culture. We are not called to run from the fire, but be willing to step into the fire. God has placed you at this time in history on purpose and for a purpose. Join us as we get better equipped to address civics and culture from a biblical worldview. Welcome to Into the Fire, powered by Dream City Church. Let's welcome our hosts Allison Furno and Debi Vandenboom.
Today's topic is, are women's sports finally protected? We have with us special guest Kim Miller, who's the founder and president of Arizona Women of Action. So nice to have you with us today.
Thank you for having me here.
Yeah, and we have our guest co-host Sam Oriza here as well.
Hello.
All right, so I'm going to let Sam take it away with some questions and we'll get started.
Yes, well, let's start with a little bit about who you are. Are you from Arizona? That was my first question, actually. I was wondering that.
Interesting. Yes, almost. I was born in Kansas, and my family moved out here when I was just a baby. So lived in Tucson most of my young stages, and then moved back to Phoenix, and then went down to U of A for college. So
awesome.
Pretty much Arizona, yeah.
Okay, great. And so you're involved with the Arizona Women of Action. How did that kind of all come about?
Yeah, that was an interesting story back in 2020 when all of us were kind of reeling from what was going on, all the insanity. And it was a group of women I knew from church and from other Christians outside of my church who just were starting to say, what can we do? This is insane. And with our churches closing down and the schools, we were seeing what was being taught to our kids. We were dealing with all of the vaccine mandates and the craziness. And then all the race riots were all happening around that same time. So all of us just kind of looked at it and said, well, what can women do about this? We've all been busy raising our kids, doing our professional lives and volunteering and everything, and yet we'd lost track of what was really happening in the seats of influence that were now rearing an ugly head and affecting our families in a way that finally we all woke up and said, okay, it's time for us to roll up our sleeves and do something. And so we just started researching, how do you even have your voice heard on, things like the city council was going to vote on whether to put a Black Lives Matter mural across the street, which was what was happening in Portland. And that was creating all these riots. And we just said, that's crazy. Our streets should not be used for any kind of message. Right. So we figured out how to get on the agenda, and we had so many hundreds of women sign up and make comments that they took it off the agenda, and we said, I guess we can make a difference. Yeah. And that was one of the first times we just started putting out an email every week and telling people what they can do with whatever time they have in their local community to make a difference. And it started with 8 women on a text chain, and now we have over 30,000 women and even men following us on between our email and our social media. So it's been a God thing. I've said that from the beginning. That was not something I planned to do, but God's put this forward. So
yeah, and Allison and I are both on the leadership team with
That's
Arizona
right.
Women of Action as well.
So I'm preaching to the choir as I'm telling you that. I know, Sam, you're coming late, but you need to be a part of it.
I know, I'm coming in. I'm surrounded by the Arizona Women of Action group.
Yes.
And then because it relates to what we're going to talk about, you have kids too. So tell us about your kids and what they do. And
I have 5 kids, and now 5 grandkids, and the 3 oldest are married, and the 2 youngest are youngest daughter just graduated from the Naval Academy last year, and she's now in Pensacola in flight school. And our youngest son is 20. And we have another daughter who's used to be the area director for Young Life in Salt Lake City and now has moved to Wisconsin. We'll probably end up doing some Young Life. So we have a lot of Young Life connections as well. But it's just been amazing.
Yeah.
So.
Awesome. That's great. And you have a couple of them have played sports, right?
Yes. All 3 of our daughters, we have 3 daughters and 2 sons. All of our kids played sports. The one daughter who went to the Naval Academy did play for Navy. She played volleyball. And so she was the one who went collegiate, but all of them played club sports. Mostly the girls were in volleyball. And that was a big constant thing that our family did. So we were very familiar with the insanity of allowing biological boys to play with biological girls.
Yeah. Did you play sports?
Not really seriously. I actually played archery in high school, which is kind of weird. I don't know if any high schools do that, but it was very cool. Yeah.
So I was not.
I was going to ask.
Was not or have ever been an athlete. No, I had really bad childhood asthma. And in those days, in the 70s, they were like telling you not. I mean, I think now it's different where they tell you to be active and be in sports. In the 70s, you were supposed to not do anything and not be involved. And so I was not in any kind of sports. But you were, right, Sam?
Yes.
You were softball, is that right?
I played club softball growing up, and then I played in college as well. So,
Nice.
yes.
Nice.
So definitely know the rigor of a sport, and cannot imagine if a male was on my team, honestly.
So did that help you get into college, or was that just an extra? Did you go on a scholarship, or did you just get into the team when you went?
Both, into the team. I found my university because of sports, and went there initially for sports, stayed from my education, but yeah.
Okay, so, playing sports.
Yep.
All right. So I just wanted that kind of background before we get into the topic.
So we know what we're talking about, women in sports.
Well, and why it relates to specifically, not just on a political level, but personal level as well.
It's true. So Arizona, I know, along with probably I would think around 20 states, is among one of the states that has the transgender sports ban. But, which I don't know if most people know this, but in 2023, 2 transgender girls filed a lawsuit against that law in Arizona. Right. Correct. Is that right? Correct. Can you tell us a little bit about that lawsuit? A little bit of background?
Yes. That lawsuit came shortly after the law was signed into being by Doug Ducey and our governor at the time. And it was the Save Women's Sports Act that was signed into law. And then there was a New York law firm that came in and found 2 plaintiffs who wanted to immediately oppose that law. And their position was they had 2 biological males who were young. One was, at the time in 23, 11 years old, and was prepubescent and he believed he was a girl. And so I don't know if he was starting the hormone therapy yet, but he was going to be. And then the 15-year-old had been on the hormones to suppress his puberty, the puberty blockers. And so their position was these boys had no difference biologically, no advantage in the sport against girls. And so they wanted to play volleyball, basketball, I believe is the older transgender girl. I always have a hard time saying that because it's not true.
Yeah.
And then the 11-year-old, I think, was also wanting to play volleyball, if I'm not mistaken. But one of them is from the Higley, the Kyrene area, and the other one is from Tucson at a private school in Tucson. Right. But that private school plays in a league against some public schools, so that's why it was relevant.
Yeah. Got it. No, and I agree with you. I think we need to stop using the language that because it's not an actual. I mean, you cannot change your sex.
Right.
You can't.
You can't.
Have XX chromosomes or XY chromosomes, and there are people who are confused and struggling with things that think that they are a different gender, but you can't turn into a different sex.
Correct.
So, which is part of the, I mean, and that's a whole separate topic, but just I'm thinking as you're talking, right, that there are these boys that, and the lie is that they're not getting the hormone, like that it's not a medical procedure that's happening to minors, but they are. They are happening. And so this law was passed. I remember it was like 2022, I think, when it was passed, and it was a Republican-held legislature, Republican governor that was signed, Republican attorney general. That's going to be important coming up too, because that was when Mark Brnovich was the attorney general, and so he initially was going to protect that, right?
That's
fight
right.
for the law, because that's their job, is to protect state law. But then when the election happened and we now have Chris Mays in as Attorney General and we have Katie Hobbs as governor, right? It's a whole different ballgame.
That's right.
And so there was nobody to defend our state law that we had passed, the governor had signed. It was in state law. And so when these families had challenged the law with out-of-state help, right?
Note that.
Right,
Yes.
that's important too, that there was nobody within the state to protect and to stand up and fight for this law that had been passed by elected officials, right? So then that's your next question, right, is how did
Arizona Women of Action get involved in the lawsuit?
Yeah, so what happened was at the time when this challenge happened and our Attorney General decided not to defend our own Arizona law, Tom Horn, who was our Superintendent of Public Instruction, decided he would defend it and he would be the one to stand up for it out of his own budget. And there was to be no, Chris Mays decided not to even give any budget to his office to be able to defend the lawsuit. So he was using, I believe, an Arizona-based law firm to represent him. And so we were approached by America First Legal out of D.C. who said, we need to give them help on this case. Would you consider intervening on behalf of women and then come alongside Tom Horn? And we said, absolutely, yes, this women and girls need to be protected. And so within our network, we found three other women who were also co-interveners with us who have girls who were in those districts or nearby who were affected directly by these two boys, biological boys, who wanted to play against their girls. One of them happens to be a volleyball coach, and she coaches girls volleyball. She knows, and she has, I believe, some sons as well. So she knows the difference between boys and girls and how they play sports. And so we just said yes. We rose our hand. We officially intervened on the lawsuit. We were denied intervention by the district judge down in Tucson, who was an Obama appointee. And then it went to the 9th district. At that point, waited for a while. We were able to get the news out, which was the good thing. We knew there was a pretty good chance that we would not prevail in that they would probably want to shut us down, which did happen, but it allowed exposure and more people to hear about it. So I was on Fox News and Friends in the morning. So nationally, they were hearing about our situation in Arizona.
Yeah, you were on several. You were on a couple of national news outlets, right? Talking.
Yeah, it's interesting. Even news outlets from other countries were coming and asking us about this. So that happened, and then eventually in the 9th Circuit, they denied our motion to intervene. So sadly, it didn't end up well, but we figured that would happen. And we did have a few Arizona lawmakers who also intervened on it.
Right.
So, yeah.
Which it's crazy to me that they would not allow you to intervene, right? I mean, because who has more of a stake than parents of girls or female volleyball coaches, right? I mean, that seems to me that is exactly right smack dab in the middle of the purview of the case, right? But again, this is where politics come in, and they don't want to allow things to go forward, which is really unfortunate. But that's really, I mean, there are some times where I see things, I'm like, okay, I can kind of understand why they think that person or that is not, cannot stand as intervening. But this one just does not make sense to me on that level.
No. Yeah. So you said that they denied it at the 9th Circuit. So what does that mean for people who don't really understand, I guess, kind of like the story of a lawsuit?
Yeah. So it goes from the district court, which was in Tucson. Then it went up to we appealed it to the 9th Circuit. So that's in the San Francisco area, and at that point, it's one of the most liberal of all of the circuit courts in the country, and it would have had to pass there, or we would have had to been able to be on the case as an intervener to be able to then appeal to, because we probably would have lost there too. It's actually just still sitting, I believe. I think it's just still there. Pending. It's pending, and we've actually I forgot to mention that there was they were given a stay to allow these two boys to be able to play for a while. I'm trying to remember the name of that, but a temporary injunction to allow those two boys to play while the court case is worked out. So they are still playing.
Because the lawsuit is still pending, and it's called, I think it's Doe versus Horn. Is that what it's called? That's the name of the lawsuit if you want to look it up and look up information. But so the lawsuit is still pending, but Arizona Women of Action is no longer on
the case. Right.
But at least it opened a door to bring awareness to that case, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And so I know Trump just signed a very popular executive order. Right. And so I kind of want to talk about how maybe some people think because of his executive order banning boys from women's sports that maybe like this case might be solved in our state or that it will be okay kind of. But how does that executive order impact this Doe versus Horn?
Right. A lot of people are confused about that, and they think, oh, great, we just get a good president in, and he just swipes his pen and everything's fixed. Well, that's not the way the law works, and his executive order only prohibits any federal funding to pay for a school who's going to allow boys to play against girls. So they could deny the federal funding if they want, which they won't. I mean, a public school by its nature gets federal funding. So, but the only thing that it's going to do is allow them, it's going to make it really difficult for them to say that. So far they've been saying, oh, well, the federal government has mandated us to allow boys to play against girls and allow boys in our girls' restrooms and locker rooms.
Because that was a Biden.
And that was a Biden thing. And now, so Biden's Title IX rewrite was also rescinded. So it's back to the original Title IX statement that was made to protect girls and their spaces, their safety, their opportunities. It's not just whether they can play a sport. I mean, it's attached to a lot of their success in life. Think about all the skills that girls learn in just being able to have competition and to obviously get scholarships like you did and like my daughter did to allow them to play collegiately and the lessons they learn about leadership and everything else. Well, that's been denied by President Biden, that administration. Donald Trump brought it back, so we now have Title IX is again enforced. So but you're right. He for our case though, part of the decision to hold it up and allow it to keep going and allow those boys to still play was because they not only cited Title IX as the reason that they believe, because what happened was they wanted to say that Title IX refers to gender identity, that is equal to sex, biological sex, and that it really is whatever their identity is. Well, that completely undermines the whole intent of Title IX, turns it upside down. And so that's been taken care of. But in this lawsuit, Doe versus Horn, they were also appealing to the 14th Amendment. And so they were saying, because the 14th Amendment says that it's basically protects people from being discriminated based on sex. And so from there, the complaint says that the ban, our Save Women's Sports Act ban, singles out and categorically bars plaintiffs from competing on girls' teams because they are transgender girls. In doing so, the ban impermissibly discriminates based on the plaintiff's transgender status, and because being transgender is a sex-based trait, it also discriminates against plaintiffs based on their sex. So that's how they twisted
big,
lots of twisting of words.
There's some verbal gymnastics happening in that statement. Oh my goodness. I'm listening to that going, none of that is true. That's so but the way that they were
they worded it makes you even more confused.
I haven't heard that whole thing. That's crazy. Because and again, you're conflating. You're saying that sex and your perceived gender is the same thing, and it's not. Sex is biological.
That's right.
Correct.
And no amount of hormones or surgery can undo that, right? I mean, and we don't need to go into all of that, but there are so many biological reasons of lung capacity, the amount of blood in your system, the length of your legs and arms, and your upper body strength, and I mean, on and on and on, right? There's so many different things. Just
inherently,
your center of balance, right, is different in men and women.
Do you want to know something funny that really blew my mind? Even the International Chess, I think it's the International or the National Chess Association, stopped transgender chess players from each other because brains are different.
Oh my goodness.
Isn't that interesting?
Wow.
Well, I mean, it's true. There's
Yeah. I mean, hey, I've been saying it for a while, but the chess people, now they know. So.
They know. But yeah, there is a lot of differences, and they're not, so it doesn't matter, you can think something about yourself, but that does not make it true.
Yes.
correct.
But yeah, that is quite the word salad there of things that are not actually true.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's important to recognize with this, what you were talking about, Sam, and the way what you responded to is that, okay, so an executive order can be undone, right? So
That's
just
right.
like you said a minute ago, we had the Biden administration put in executive orders that changed Title IX, which we'll talk about that in a minute, but about what that actually was. I want to bring something up about that as well. But there were executive orders that changed the meaning of Title IX, and then Trump comes in and changes it back. So the next administration can do the same thing. So none of this stuff is permanently settled until it's settled in law, not through an executive order. So either through a court case, like what happened with abortion, right, where you have court case that made it legal throughout all 50 states, and then a court case that sent it back to the states, or whether you put it into federal law through the Congress or in state law, right? So this is what we're talking about with our case. It's still pending. It's not settled. We still have to deal with it here at the state level and figure out what's going to happen with that, because ultimately those executive orders can be undone.
Yes.
And technically, the law currently is that the biological boys cannot play in the women's sports in Arizona.
That is correct, unless, except for in this case, those two boys who have gotten a preliminary, I'm trying to find the name of that because it's, they've been allowed temporary injunction. Yes, yes, preliminary injunction. There we go. And it's based on their, the fact that they were prepubescent.
Right.
And that they're on the hormone suppressants. So they believe that's making all the difference.
Having people who actually uphold the law is a big thing for us. Yes. Yeah. Which is when the AG is so important here.
Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
We'll be having an election. Sorry, I was like,
no,
choking.
it's okay. I know. I was like trying to buy her time.
Oh, good grief. I know. I'm like stalling for time because I'm dying over here. So I got a tickle in my throat that would not stop. All right. But the Attorney General race is going to be in 2 years.
That's right.
In 2026, we'll be electing an Attorney General again. And so that's going to be extremely important for both this case and for other things that are going on.
The future, especially. Yeah.
Yeah, that was one of the most interesting things, is to realize that our own attorneys general in the various states have so much power that they can decide which laws they choose to defend and which ones they don't.
Right.
Even though a law was duly elected or written and passed by our legislature.
Signed by the governor.
And signed by our own governor, and our legislature was acting on the representing the people. So it's really a slap against all Arizonans, and especially our girls.
Yes.
And that's what's so interesting, is that so many women are the ones who are on the side of allowing transgender boys to compete against women, which I think comes from a misplaced compassion. Women have a very strong gift of compassion, and we know that, but it's been weaponized against us to where they are told that they're cruel if they don't, or that they're allowing bullying if they allow or don't allow a biological boy who is going through this confusion, and no one is saying that those boys aren't important and that we should not have compassion for them. But is the answer to tell them a lie about about reality, and then to also cause other women, other girls around them or families to be affected in such a horrible way that they could literally be damaged for life, which many girls have been. Yeah.
Well, and these kind of bans too. It's not saying that they cannot play sports at all. They can play on co-ed teams. They can play on boys' teams. So they're not being prevented from playing sports of any kind.
Correct.
They just cannot play on exclusively girls' teams. And this is one of the things, I think you're right with that misplaced compassion. And one of the things that bothers me about all of this too is you're telling girls that they're not allowed to stand up for themselves, right?
Yes.
Yep.
So if you have female athletes, Riley Gaines comes to mind, but there are other ones. There are high school level girls that have had the same issue where you have a boy who's not had surgery changing in a girl's locker room. They're not allowed to complain. They're not allowed to stand up for themselves or express their discomfort because they're being told that they're the problem, right? And so again, how is any of that protecting women? Right. You and I are very close in age, Kim, and I mean, Title IX was enacted in 1972. It's been my entire lifetime of hearing this, and early on in elementary school, again, I was not an athlete, but I do remember how big it was, trying to get girls' sports and PE classes and those kind of things that were not around before that, and have those things. And it's just crazy how just in my lifetime, right, that it's changed from that to the opposite of that. And I do think the pendulum is swinging back now where we have some sanity prevailing, even in the public eye, that there's been a lot more people speaking up against it because they do realize, okay, we're denying biology. This is not actually right. It's not protecting women. It's not fair. There's so many different levels where it is. But it's very important, I think, in this context to realize that just because, the president signs an executive order, it does not settle the issue.
Right. No.
On this or on other things, right? None of those executive orders, they're great. Like, if there's some things that we like that we think they're great, but that does not settle what's happening. There has to be more involved in making sure that it stays.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
So, and even I was going to say, my daughter, since she played volleyball at the Naval Academy, she was terrified about what if Navy, because even the service academies were becoming pretty woke, and to my knowledge, there were no transgender people playing on, at least on volleyball teams in any of those service academies. But if they did, I mean, the girls were very worried about that because they knew there was no way they could compete against even the most mediocre male athlete, like in the case of Riley Gaines and Leah Thomas. And so, but then there are other girls that we played against. We know a family from, I think their daughter played for Colgate, and these girls were upset about even this. They thought boys should be able to play, and their compassion was weaponized against them, and they had to go because what they did is they had counseling sessions for all the girls to be able to accept boys to play on their teams and stuff. So they, you can see how they're trying to, like you said, they're not protecting the girls. In fact, they're trying to brainwash them to say, no, it's you that's the problem. You need to change, and you need to accept and be open to letting guys stare at you in the locker room, all of those things that it's really humiliating. Yeah. Did you have another question?
Or? No, that was my last question.
Yeah. So I think the last thing was about what we can do to make a difference. So one of the big things is to pay attention to these 2026 elections in Arizona and in other states, because this is if you're listening from another state, your attorney general at your state level is so important, and it's one of those offices that I feel like is way under the radar. People don't pay attention for the most part. They don't know anything about the attorney general. They don't know anything about the office or who's running or why it's important. And just like you said earlier, that about not being aware that the attorney general can choose which laws they're going to uphold, which state laws they're actually going to fight for, and which ones they're not. The attorney general has that. We're going to do another episode related to abortion and talking about the attorney general as it relates to that as well.
That's right.
But in so many different areas, that attorney general office is so important. And so really start paying attention right now. In Arizona, it'll be in 2026. Other states, it may be the 2 years later, depending on when your state elections are. start paying attention now to who's running, where they stand on these issues, and if they're going to actually uphold state law or not. And then also tell us about SALT and about how people can get connected with that initiative, because that's something that also could be used in other states as well, or across Arizona.
Exactly. And that's why we really, because of issues like this, is why we wanted people in the church to be aware of what's going on and how to just be informed. It's one thing to have a biblical worldview and to have great preaching and all of that, which we love. We're not competing with that, but we're just helping those people in churches who say, okay, I know Jesus calls us to be salt and light in the world. How can we do that in a practical sense where there are people in our own neighborhoods who are being affected by laws that we've been told don't be political.
Right.
Well, we're not being political, we're being biblical. And what's happened is the culture and the world has made these issues political, but they were really foundational laws and rules within our own scripture about the role of parents and about male, female, and all of those. So we need to stand up for those and help people in the churches. So what we're doing is having monthly study groups where we apply an issue. It could be a political issue that's going on or a cultural issue, and we connect it from scripture, from how to understand it and apply it, and then what's happening in your community right now, and how your group, whether you could start it from your, it could be in your church, it could be part of an existing Bible study, and because it's once a month, it's really easy to incorporate. You could do it have your meeting at a coffee shop or in your home, and Christians are coming together and saying, finally, we just need to know what's going on and how we can get out there into the community and bring the Holy Spirit. We bring prayer into it, and start to spread the salt so that we're not being influenced as Christians by the culture. We are influencing culture, which is what it's supposed to be. And the groups are even inviting non-Christians in, which is wonderful. And I was at one of them where it was a gay hairdresser who's a lovely guy. He's real nice and very conservative. And he goes, I just never knew Christians really thought about issues like this. I was like, yes. And so it's great that we're all coming together around the values and the love and truth. That's why it's called strategically advancing love and truth is what SALT stands for. Because we have to be strategic and we want to advance love and truth together. Because if you have one without the other, it's doesn't work.
Right.
So,
Yes. Yeah.
So good.
And so we will, the website for that is what?
Yeah, so we have Arizona Women of Action as our main organization, where we have our weekly newsletter that goes out on how you can take action on things and be inspired. We have a blog and a prayer and everything in there, but we also have a 501c3 organization called Women for Families and Freedom. So it's a mouthful, but we're going through some changes right now to make that a little more easy for everybody to remember. But for now, go to womenforfamiliesandfreedom.org. And then in there, you'll see it says projects. You click on it and it goes to SALT. And then it tells you all about that. And we want more and more people from churches to notify us, and we'll get you plugged in, or we'll help you find another SALT group or start one. And it's super easy.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's great.
So
and
good.
we'll put that link also in our in the show notes as well when we do that.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate it. And thank you all for joining us on Into the Fire, powered by Dream City Church.
Thank you.
You can listen to this podcast on Apple and Spotify and follow us on social media. Find all the info on the show notes. To learn more about Dream City Church, visit our website at dreamcitychurch.us. Thanks for listening.